And greetings to you. Joe Rubenstein here, producer and host of Real-Time 1960s. I want to thank you very much for joining me today and to remind you that all of our content, film reviews, retro-style news reports, our daily timeline, can be found on our website, realtime1960s.com. And if you love what we're doing, visit patreon.com/realtime1960s, support this project, get exclusive access to bonus content, and help us continue to bring you this portal into the past. That's patreon.com/realtime1960s. And on this final podcast of the year, I want to give a personal shout out to Roseanne Martino, who was our first patron at the family tier of membership. She's been a patron for 4 years now. And also Daniel Paquette, the newest patron at that level. So thank you, Roseanne and Daniel, for your support. It is greatly appreciated. And today, we enter the home stretch of our journey through my ranked list of the top 10 films of 1964. On 4 previous episodes, we covered films 10 through 5. The Naked Kiss, That Man from Rio, The Pawnbroker, Goldfinger, The Soft Skin, and Nothing But a Man. And today, we move on to film number 4. So without further ado, the best of 64 at the movies, right now. And my 4th ranked film for 1964, the Beatles' big screen debut, was conceived in the fall of '63, so just before their big splash on The Ed Sullivan Show in February of '64. It was filmed in London in March and April of '64, so just after their first US tour, and it was released here in August. And the film, A Hard Day's Night, both cemented and documented the major American pop culture phenomenon of '64, Beatlemania. And happily, the film was far better than almost anyone expected. Andrew Sarris, critic for The Village Voice, famously called it the Citizen Kane of jukebox musicals. I don't know about that, but the film, directed by an American, Richard Lester, is certainly light years better than the Elvis Presley musicals that were being pumped out around this time, often twice a year, far more of its time, and also more influential, especially on TV programs soon to follow, from The Monkees to Laugh-In. It influenced some of the spy comedies and James Bond spoofs of the mid-'60s as well, and it spawned a host of lesser imitation low-budget musicals with groups like Jerry and the Pacemakers and the Dave Clark Five, groups largely forgotten today. Now, as far as influences on the film, Buster Keaton certainly, with his sight gags and lampooning of authority figures, but even more the Marx Brothers, with their hyperactivity and refreshing sense of the absurd. At one point in the film, a reporter asks George Harrison, "What would you call that hairstyle you're wearing?" The Beatles answered literally hundreds of questions about their hair that year, to which George replies, "Arthur." So, also like the Marx Brothers, you have the 4 perfectly balanced complementary personas. John Lennon, the hyper-creative wise guy, Paul McCartney, the clean, cherubic sort of PR man of the quartet, Harrison kind of wry and sleepy. This was before his Indian mystic phase. And Ringo Starr, the sad clown who only seems happy when he's playing his drums. Another influence on the film is the cinema verite style of both the British kitchen sink films of this era and the French New Wave. And you see this in the handheld camera, the quick cutting, and the kind of stream of consciousness style. Much like the films of Jean-Luc Godard, the film never seems to settle anywhere, but presents itself more as a series of exciting surfaces and clever bits. And when all that begins to stall, there are the songs, which, while they don't reach the creative peak of the Beatles' work soon to follow, especially after they stopped touring in '66 and were able to focus their full attention on studio work, but they certainly represent a large step toward that peak. And the performances are well-spaced and creatively filmed. For the first one, I Should Have Known Better, Lester creates a surrealistic segue from the Beatles playing cards in a crowded storage compartment on a train to them playing their instruments with girls staring at them through a cage barrier, all filmed with a handheld Arriflex. And then later, they perform a McCartney composition, And I Love Her, on a theatrical stage, but it's filmed not just with the usual close-ups and wide shots, but also on a bank of video monitors. So segments like that really serve as forerunners of the music videos that would become a staple 20 years later. Another achievement is the clear definition of the four personalities, despite the fact that the Beatles, while experienced performers, had no acting experience whatsoever. Now, some of that clear definition is due just to the natural force of their charisma and humorous interplay, which became famous at their press conferences, but credit also goes to Alan Owen, who, before he wrote the Oscar-nominated script, observed the Beatles on tour and incorporated not just their style of speaking and humor into the script, but also this idea of their being prisoners of their fame, with a punishing schedule of performances and recording sessions, and little if any privacy. Which, if there's any theme to the film, that's it. The scenes alternate between the Beatles being trapped in various claustrophobic settings, set upon by screaming girls, officious managers, TV directors, phony trendsetters, the press, and various authority figures, and then breaking out and simply running around to the accompaniment of their own music, which is good fun, very cinematic, and also a testament to their physical condition, despite the fact that all four were heavy cigarette smokers at this time. They do a lot of running in the film. The film is shot in black and white, which works well. Their 1965 follow-up, Help, was shot in color and actually looks much more dated. But this was an economic decision for Hard Day's Night, as black and white film was cheaper then. You know, nobody knew how long this Beatlemania thing would last. In the fall of '63, when this film was conceived, they were a big deal in Britain for sure, but pretty much unknown here. So the idea at United Artists, who released the film, was, let's make an exploitation film quickly and cheaply and get it out there before they fizzle. They were actually motivated less by the film itself than by the prospect of the soundtrack album, to which they had secured the rights as part of the deal, and which they were pretty sure would sell, and of course it did. The title song, by the way, A Hard Day's Night, which to me is the best in the film, was written to order in one night by John Lennon at the very end of the shooting schedule, which is why you don't see the Beatles perform it in the film. You just hear it over the credits. As they were shooting, the film was called Beatlemania, but they eventually settled on one of Ringo's habitual odd phrases. After an all-night recording session one time, he had said, without trying to be funny, "It's been a hard day's night." And so once they'd settled on that as a title, the producers thought, let's have a song by that name as well. So Lennon wrote this terrific song on the back of a birthday card for his son in one night, and it went on to win a Grammy Award. But as I said, the film is more than just a musical comedy or a jukebox film. It's also an historical document of London in the 60s and of the most important pop group of the decade. Unfortunately, none of the Beatles' follow-up films were nearly as good, with the exception of Yellow Submarine, but they don't act in that, it's animated. In fact, Help, which they made again with Lester in '65 under a thick cloud of marijuana smoke, is barely watchable, probably for that reason, despite several excellent songs, especially the title song. But this one, at 87 minutes, does not overstay its welcome and is well proportioned with a brief kind of concert montage at the end before a screaming audience of hysterical teenagers, mostly girls, who were definitely not acting. The opening segment on the train is a little stiff. The film was shot sequentially, so on the train scenes, the Beatles were still adjusting to this idea of speaking lines from a page sincerely, as if they were spontaneous, and they would often get embarrassed and dissolve into laughing fits. But they were quick studies, and all of them, especially Lennon and Harrison, have some very fine and funny moments, greatly aided by a terrific collection of British character actors. My only real complaint is the syncing. Some of the interior dialogue on the train, for example, and all the songs were post-synced, and the mouths often don't precisely match up with what we're hearing, which I'm sure was due to budget and time constraints. But that's a minor flaw, and the film was a huge hit with tons of repeat business. And many teenagers who couldn't get enough of their idols would smuggle tape recorders into the theater so they could listen to the dialogue at home. Which, by the way, before the film was released here, some genius at United Artists asked Lester to dub the Beatles' dialogue with proper mid-Atlantic British accents, worried that Americans wouldn't understand the Beatles' actual Liverpool accents. But McCartney, when he heard that, got mad. He said, look, if we can understand a frickin' cowboy talking Texan, they can understand us talking Liverpool. And wiser heads prevailed. So not only one of the most profitable films of the 60s, it cost $500,000 to make and took in $8 million in the first week, but a critical success as well. My favorite quote is from then 50-year-old critic Brendan Gill of The New Yorker, who wrote from his lofty cultural perch, quote, "Though I don't pretend to understand what makes these four rather odd-looking boys so fascinating to so many scores of millions of people, I admit that I feel a certain mindless joy stealing over me as they caper about uttering sounds," unquote. I like that. But it is clear watching the film that the Beatles themselves are having a good time, despite the fact that they hated getting up at the crack of dawn to shoot. But that sense of fun is certainly contagious. When the Beatles first saw the film, by the way, in a screening room with just the crew, they had a negative reaction. They felt terribly self-conscious, especially McCartney, who thought he was terrible. But then, when they saw it with an audience who clearly loved it, the Beatles laughed along with them and enjoyed it as well. And in the years to come, all of them spoke of it with pride. Back in a moment. Your feedback is important to us. On Twitter, @Realtime1960s, on our Facebook page, or you can email the program, realtime1960s@gmail.com. Really, however you'd like to engage with us, we love engaging with you. And if you'd like to join our family and help us continue to bring you great content, please go to patreon.com/realtime1960s and subscribe. Don't forget to visit us at realtime1960s.com for our timeline, each and every podcast, links to social media, how to reach us directly, everything you need to know about this portal into the past that we are creating. Thanks so much for joining us, and stay tuned for the next installment of this ongoing series covering the top 10 films of 1964. So take care, and I'll see you soon.